Hi, thank you for coming today. I'm a fiction writer currently living in Philadelphia, and this is my second time in the Sheridan, Wyoming area. I was a resident at UCross a while back, and at the time I came to UCross, I was living on the West Coast. I was living in San Francisco, and I had traveled through Wyoming once or twice, but I had never resided in Wyoming. And the month that I spent at UCross was just so awestruck by the landscape. At the time I was working on a project set in the Northeast, and I had a really difficult time getting into the mindset of that project because my studio I was so overwhelmed by the landscape. I felt that I'd landed on the moon. And so I ended up starting new work there. And at the time I wasn't sure what I was going to do with that work, if I was just experimenting or having fun. But one of those stories I continued working on after I left UCross. It was set in Wyoming, and it went on and went in all these directions I wasn't expecting. So there's a little bit of Wyoming in this book I'm going to read from. It's a collection of short stories that I published fairly recently. And the collection, it's something I worked on for a long period of time. There are 12 stories in the collection. There's a wide range in the collection geographically, some stories set in the West, some in the Northeast, some in the Midwest, a range of subjects, but there are common themes that recur that interest me. So I'm going to read today from the beginning of a short story called Rancho Village. In the story, Rancho Village is pronounced Rancho Village. So just to let you know, that becomes clear why later in the story, but just so you're not confused when I'm pronouncing it that way. Sometimes things don't work out the way you plan them. If you told me I'd be living in a cow town with a guy who left piles of crap all over the floor, a guy with a belly and a few tufts of hair on the head, I'd have said you were nuts. You don't dream about a guy like this. The piles of crap, they're actually student papers. If the students knew the way he treated their royal submissions, I'm sure they'd ask for their money back. They have no idea how many hours they spent on the bathroom floor until he can bring himself to put pen to them. The papers never go away. They grow, sprouting fresh seeds on every surface of our apartment. Sometimes we do the grading for him. It doesn't pain me as much. You don't need to know that much, it turns out. Each night when he comes home from work, he empties out a fresh batch. He collects new ones before he gives the old ones back. Sometimes it takes him all the way till finals week, and even then sometimes he makes excuses. Often it's me. His wife is having a baby. Gruesome complications. He has to stay all night at the hospital. But I'm not his wife, and I'm having no babies. It's a wonder his students don't report him, but they're placid, like the cows that dot the hillsides for miles around. Sometimes I think if I blink, I'll see an ocean. I'll try it 2 or 3 times for luck. I used to live near an ocean, growing up and then again when Jack met me. Let's face it, you feel better being near one. You wonder about someone like Jack who doesn't notice the absence of it, how their mind might work. The corners of the papers get folded from being crammed into his bag, and sometimes they get pen marks on them. Red or blue or purple, whatever's lurking there in the bottom of his mysterious briefcase. It's a black hole. Stick your hand down there and you'll find sticky lifesavers, chewing gum, staples that jab into your pinky. Spare yellow stickums with messages, reminders from months ago. Clearly this says something about him, but I don't like to contemplate it. Somehow Jack pulls himself together in the morning to show up for class, look halfway presentable in the hallways or faculty room. Then again, the competition at Caldwell College isn't too stiff. It's no beauty pageant there, I'll tell you. He looks no better or worse than anyone else. Our story. We met, and he liked me. He asked someone about me, was I single? I was on a downslope at the time, ripe, I guess, for wandering into something inappropriate. He was older, not as old as I thought it turns out, but of a whole nother generation. He had a wife, some kids somewhere, a pension plan. I'm not sure why he liked me. I never know why, it always surprises me. At the time, I was a blank. Someone, another guy, we don't need to get into it, do we, had left me. I had hopes about that guy. I put up curtains and plants on the windowsill. I got to know all his little ticks. We had a shelf with spices. When I met Jack, I was working at the cafe. It was a temporary job, but okay for a while, and I felt like a big blank inside. And then, oddly, when I looked at myself in the mirror, which I tried not to, I looked that way too. I could disappear and no one would know it. I could commit a crime and no one would be able to draw my picture. I was fading away. At the cafe, if people tried to draw me into conversation, which often happens at a cafe, I wouldn't have anything to say. How do people ever have anything to say? Nothing inside would budge. So this is what he walked into. He asked me to a movie and there was no good reason to turn him down. It was beyond me to invent a clever excuse. It was easier just to go, and certainly it wouldn't be any worse than spending an evening with myself. He wore me down. This is what some men do, especially the ones who aren't too great looking. You wonder where they get the confidence. He kept calling, coming by, courting. He'd made up his mind and that was enough. My resistance was down, like I had the flu. In my blankness, I felt no one would find me charming. Why would they? I had nothing to say, and my features were all blurry. It wasn't too long we'd jump from there to our apartment with cream wall to wall in the cow town. Our apartment looks like every other apartment above and below us. It looks like every apartment in the building next door and the ones a half mile down in our complex, Rancho Village. There are other complexes nearby with similar names, and they look the same too. Between that and the seasons, there are none. You wonder if you're really here. I don't perspire the way I used to. Sometimes I get hungry, but not too hungry. I feel like a pod person. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. And next I'm introducing Amber Eve.
Do you want to actually take some questions, Kerry?
Yes. I'll have you say, I have copies of the book in the back if people are interested. I'm allowed to talk afterwards too, but if anyone has any questions.
So I do.
Oh, okay.
I was just curious if there was a moment where you realized that writing was something you wanted to do.
Oh, wow, that's a good question. You know, I always wrote as a kid, you know, it was something that, you know, when you first learn grammar and you start writing composition in whatever, second or third grade, I had an affinity for. I think I became a creative writer in 7th grade. I was in Catholic school in Brooklyn, and so there's a lot of order and rigidity and not a lot of creativity. And in 7th grade, I had a really wonderful language arts teacher who had us keep a journal, a diary, which was kind of radical in the Catholic school that I was in. And at the time, I was I was like a big reader as a kid and kind of lonely, and had a very rich inner world. But I didn't have that much to write about in my diary because I didn't have friends. I always like my friends from my books. So she collected the diaries and graded them. So I started inventing things, you know, making things up. And then, you know, and I've always loved fiction. I've always loved, so much solace in literature, and there has been my whole life. So I think that was kind of a trigger for me, I guess.
Awesome. Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.